I was being brought to set in a wheelchair. Like, I couldn't walk that far. So I had to tell everybody because I needed help. You know, I needed someone to help me stand, and I needed someone to help. I needed someone to help me to get there.
In August of 2024, Christina Applegate sat down at a microphone for her podcast, Messy, and welcomed a guest she had known for nearly 4 decades. That guest was Ed O'Neill, the man who played her father on Married with Children for 11 seasons. What followed was not a promotional interview or a nostalgic highlight reel. It was one of the most candid conversations Applegate has ever had in public, and by the end of it, fans understood something they had only guessed at for years. The bond between Christina Applegate and Ed O'Neill was never just television. It was real, it was complicated, and it shaped both of their lives. This is the story of that relationship, told through what Christina Applegate herself has actually said on record across interviews and podcast episodes over the past several years. When Married with Children premiered on Fox in 1987, Christina Applegate was only 15 years old. She had already been acting for years, having appeared on Days of Our Lives as a baby, but nothing had prepared her for the environment she was about to step into. The show was built to be provocative. It mocked the sitcom family formula that had dominated television for decades, and it did so with crude humor, sexual innuendo, and a willingness to offend that no other network comedy dared attempt at the time. Playing Kelly Bundy meant playing a character written as an oblivious, promiscuous teenage bombshell, a role that put a real 15-year-old girl at the center of adult jokes on a weekly basis. Ed O'Neill, who played her father Al Bundy, was already in his early 40s when the show began, a working actor with a theater background and years of experience navigating the entertainment industry. The age gap and experience gap between the two of them meant that, almost by default, O'Neill became something more than a co-star. Over 11 seasons, that dynamic grew into what Applegate has since described as a genuine father-daughter relationship, one built inside the strange, high-pressure environment of a hit sitcom set. The clearest window into this relationship came directly from Applegate's own words on the Messy podcast episode released in August 2024. Introducing O'Neill to her audience, she struggled to even categorize what he meant to her, eventually landing on the idea that he had effectively raised her, joking that whatever people liked or disliked about her personality, they could credit or blame him for it. It was a light-hearted way of expressing something much heavier. That the years she spent on that set, from 15 to 26, were the years that formed who she became as an adult, and O'Neill was present for nearly all of them. She went further, telling him directly how much their relationship meant to her decades later, describing long phone calls where the two of them would talk and laugh for hours, and noting that despite generally disliking phone conversations, she made an exception for him because he was, in her words, the person she talked to more than anyone else. That detail matters because it shows the relationship never ended when the cameras stopped rolling in 1997. It evolved into an actual friendship that both of them have maintained voluntarily for over 25 years, long after there was any professional reason to stay close. For his part, O'Neill's memories of working with a teenage Applegate were rooted in genuine respect for her abilities. He recalled that she had an exceptional memory for dialogue, often knowing her lines and everyone else's before the rest of the cast had even finished reading through a script, and he called her performance on the show consistently excellent. He also joked, with the same dry humor that defined his Al Bundy character, that she drove him a little crazy over the years for reasons he didn't elaborate on, a comment that drew laughter rather than tension between them. What makes the Messy podcast conversation especially significant is that Applegate didn't limit herself to warm nostalgia. She used the platform to reveal, in her own words, some of what she was privately going through during the years the show was filming. She has spoken about the fact that her teenage years overlapped with her mother's cancer diagnosis, a source of real fear and instability for a young girl already navigating fame. She has also spoken publicly about struggling with an eating disorder during that period of her life, and about how those combined pressures often led her to withdraw from the people around her, including her castmates. Applegate has described her behavior at the time as a kind of self-protective armor, a way of holding herself together while dealing with circumstances far heavier than most teenagers face. She has credited O'Neill with being someone who was simply present through that period, someone she could rely on even when she wasn't in a place to fully open up. It's a more grounded and human account than any tabloid narrative of secret on-set rescues. It's not a story about a bodyguard shielding a young star from danger. It's a story about a mentor being a steady, consistent presence for a young colleague who was quietly struggling, surviving the boycott. Married with Children also became, at one point, the target of a real and well-documented controversy. In 1989, a Michigan homemaker named Terry Ricalta watched an episode and was outraged enough by its content to organize a letter-writing campaign urging advertisers to pull their support from the show. Her campaign succeeded in convincing a number of major companies to withdraw sponsorship, and for a period of time, the show's future on Fox was genuinely uncertain. The controversy generated enormous media attention, and rather than killing the show, it had the opposite effect. Curiosity drew in new viewers, and Married with Children's ratings climbed. The cast, including a teenage Applegate, went from working on a niche cult comedy to working on one of the most talked-about shows seemingly overnight, in the middle of a national culture war debate about what was acceptable on network TV. It was an early lesson for a very young cast member in how quickly public perception and professional stability can shift, and how a show's survival can hinge on forces completely outside the actor's control. When Married with Children was canceled in 1997 after 11 seasons and 259 episodes, there was no farewell tour, no widely publicized series finale event, and no ceremonial send-off for a cast that had spent over a decade together. The show simply ended, the way many long-running series did in that era, and the cast dispersed into their next projects. For Applegate, who had spent essentially her entire adolescence and early 20s on that soundstage, it marked the end of the only steady professional home she had known. What kept the relationship with O'Neill alive after that wasn't contractual obligation or press appearances. It was, by Applegate's own account, an ongoing friendship that continued through phone calls, occasional reunions, and check-ins over the years that followed, including a 2009 project called Starving, in which O'Neill, Applegate, Katie Sagal, and David Faustino all appeared together again, playing fictionalized versions of themselves. Both actors went on to significant success after Married with Children ended. Applegate built a varied career across film and television, appearing in movies like The Sweetest Thing and Anchorman, and starring in television series including Samantha Who and Netflix's Dead to Me, for which she earned multiple award nominations. O'Neill found a second wave of major success starring as Jay Pritchett on Modern Family, a role that won him a Golden Globe and cemented him as one of the most recognizable comedic actors of his generation. Despite running in different professional circles for most of those years, both have said publicly that they stayed in touch, with Applegate specifically noting that O'Neill remained one of the people she spoke to most consistently, even during the years when their careers pulled them in very different directions. In August 2021, Applegate announced on social media that she had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, a chronic disease of the central nervous system that has no cure and can affect mobility, balance, vision, and cognitive function. She revealed that doctors discovered the disease while she was filming the final season of Dead to Me, meaning she completed that show's production while dealing with a diagnosis the public didn't yet know about. In the years since, Applegate has spoken candidly, often through her podcast, about how the disease has changed her daily life. She now walks with a cane. She has described experiencing cognitive fog and has talked openly about the grief of losing physical abilities she once took for granted. In a 2023 interview with Vanity Fair, she said she couldn't imagine returning to the physical demands of a film or television set, and told the Los Angeles Times that the idea of 12 to 14-hour shooting days was no longer something she felt capable of. She has since focused on producing, developing projects, and doing voice work rather than on-camera roles. The most visible public marker of how much support Applegate still has from the entertainment community came at the 75th Emmy Awards in January 2024. She appeared as the first presenter of the night, walking out with the help of a cane and the arm of host Anthony Anderson, to the sound of the Married with Children theme song. The audience rose to its feet in a spontaneous standing ovation. Visibly emotional, Applegate diffused the moment with her characteristic humor, joking to the crowd that they were, in her words, shaming her and her disability by standing up for her, before adding a self-deprecating line about her appearance that got a laugh from the room. She went on to reflect on her decades-long career, from her earliest screen credit on Days of Our Lives as a baby to her more recent work on Dead to Me, before presenting the award for Outstanding Supporting Actress in a Comedy Series. It was, by multiple accounts from outlets covering the ceremony, one of the most emotional moments of that year's Emmys, a recognition not just of her career, but of her willingness to face a difficult diagnosis in full public view. That brings the story back to the messy episode from August 2024, the conversation that functions as the real reunion at the heart of this story. It wasn't a scripted sitcom revival or a red carpet event. It was Applegate, now navigating life with MS, choosing to sit down with the man who had been a consistent presence since she was a teenager and talk honestly about what he meant to her, in a format that didn't require her to stand on a soundstage for hours. The episode revealed several things at once. It confirmed that the closeness between Applegate and O'Neill was never manufactured for the cameras. It had persisted, largely privately, for over 25 years since the show ended. It gave Applegate a platform to speak honestly about difficult chapters of her adolescence, including her mother's illness and her own eating disorder, in a way that framed O'Neill not as a rescuer, but as a steady presence during a hard period. And it showed how her health condition has actually changed the way she connects with former castmates and audiences alike, replacing physically demanding appearances with long-form conversations, where she has more control over her environment and her energy. Part of what made the on-set relationship between Applegate and O'Neill unusual was that it doubled as an informal apprenticeship. Married with children leaned heavily on the cast's ability to riff, adjust timing, and find laughs beyond what was written on the page, and O'Neill, with a theater background that predated his television career, was particularly comfortable working that way. Entertainment writers who have since studied his career have pointed out that the same instincts he sharpened on that sitcom, timing, physical comedy, and the ability to make an exasperated, difficult character sympathetic, carried directly into his performance as Jay Pritchett on Modern Family 2 decades later. In some retrospective analysis of his career,